They say cities never sleep. But at 2 a.m. in Eld Hollow, the silence told a different story. The rain fell gently, not in torrents, but in a hush, like the world was exhaling something it had held in too long. Empty streets stretched out like veins, glistening under tired streetlights. The city had stripped itself of noise and neon, and what remained was something bare and strangely human. Lena walked with slow, practiced steps through Ashfern Park, her coat too thin for the cold, her coffee too lukewarm to matter. It had been another long night at the late-shift bakery flour on her sleeves, the scent of bread still clinging to her skin. She didn't mind walking. Buses cost more than she had, and besides, she'd grown used to the company of silence. The path curved through trees dripping with rain, past benches long abandoned to the night. Most were empty shadows on wood, nothing more. But one was not. She saw him before she realized she had stopped walking. A man. Still. Alone. His suit, once sharp, now soaked through, clung to him like a memory he couldn't shake. Rain pooled in his hair, dripped down his face, but he made no move to brush it away. He looked lost. Not in the way of someone who took a wrong turn, but in the way of someone who had nowhere left to go. Lena's instinct was to keep walking. He didn't ask for help. He didn't even look alive, really. Just another figure swallowed by the night. But pain, real pain, has a presence, and his surrounded him like a fog. She didn't understand why she turned back. Maybe it was how still he sat. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible in the rain. She approached slowly, stopping just close enough to be heard. "I had a second cup," she said quietly, placing it beside him on the bench. "It's not warm anymore, but it's better than nothing." No reaction. No nod. Just the rain. She lingered for a moment, unsure if she'd done something kind or foolish. Then she turned, her footsteps already fading behind her. "But then I didn't think strangers remembered how to care," he said, voice frayed and raw, like it hadn't been used in days. She didn't stop. Didn't look back. Her words were soft, barely more than a thought. "Strangers don't owe you anything. That's why it means something when they do." And then she disappeared into the dark, taking nothing with her, except maybe the weight from his shoulders. If she had turned around, she might have seen it. His hand, reaching slowly for the cup. His eyes, for the first time that night, no longer fixed on the ground. The bench remained still long after she'd left. The coffee sat there, faintly steaming one last trace of warmth in a city too busy to notice kindness anymore. And beyond the trees, the girl in the worn coat vanished into the quiet hours, her footsteps swallowed by rain. Morning arrived without color. Eld Hollow looked the same as it always did after a long night of rain-gray, dripping, weary. The cafe where Lena worked flicked its lights on at 6 a.m., just as the clouds began to thin. No one noticed that she'd stumbled home close to 3, socks wet, body frozen, mind full. But something inside her had shifted. It wasn't because she'd offered coffee to a stranger who said almost nothing. It was his eyes, how they looked just before she walked away. No longer drowning. Just quiet. Lena was wiping down the counter when the door swung open. Wind curled through the room, carrying with it a sharp cold and the chime of the old bell above the door. She looked up. It was him. Gone was the soaked suit, the look of someone unraveling. In his place stood a man in a faded shirt, jeans scuffed at the knees, his hair still damp with mourning. His eyes were red, but alert, sober. There was something new in him, a quiet steadiness, like a man learning how to stand again. She stepped forward from behind the counter, though she didn't need to. "Can I help you?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "My name's Leo," he said, voice low and rough. "I'm looking for work, anything. I don't mind getting my hands dirty." The cafe owner, Mr. Calder, barely looked up from his books. "No ID? No address? No job?" he said bluntly. Leo didn't argue. He simply nodded once, slowly, like someone who had heard no enough times to not flinch anymore. His hand gripped the strap of his old canvas bag, knuckles white. Lena saw something then. Not pity. Recognition. She had carried that same look once when she first arrived in Eld Hollow, with 2 crumpled bills and a folded eviction notice still warm from the mailbox. "He's got nothing," she said quietly. "So he'll work twice as hard as someone who's had everything." Calder glanced at her, then at Leo. A long pause passed. Then he muttered, "Trial. 1 week, no pay." Leo bowed his head. "Thank you," he whispered. The days that followed were slow and rainy. Leo barely spoke. He scrubbed floors, hauled trash, cleaned dishes until his hands were raw. He learned fast. He never once complained. But once, just once, when a customer snapped at Lena for mixing up an order, Leo froze. His hand twitched toward his back pocket, reaching for a card that wasn't there. A reflex. A memory of solving problems with money. Then he caught himself. He lowered his hand, grabbed a rag, and gently wiped the table. In that small act, unnoticed by most, something inside him either fractured or began to mend. A week passed. One late night, with the cafe nearly empty and rain whispering against the windows again, Lena sat in the back kitchen, cradling a cold cup of tea, her body sinking from fatigue. Leo passed by, then paused, came back. He warmed ginger water, placed it beside her, and sat across without a word. Silence sat comfortably between them. "You wash dishes," she murmured, not as a question but a wondering. Leo stared at the candle flickering between them. "Because I'm not as clean as I used to be," he said. She didn't respond. Not because she didn't understand, but because she understood too well. "My mom died when I was 13, she said softly. "Dad left the next year. I got by washing dishes, too. Learned early not to expect kindness, and not to trust it when it came." Leo looked at her. Really looked. "I used to think I couldn't be touched," he said. "I had everything, every door opened. But the one thing that destroyed me wasn't business. It was her, the woman I thought I'd marry." Lena almost asked more, but something told her not to. So she asked something simpler. "Did you ever want to just disappear?" Leo's gaze didn't waver. "Yeah," he whispered. "Every day. Until someone handed me a cold cup of coffee in the rain." "Someone unplaced a cup of coffee in front of me," Leo said quietly. "They didn't ask why I was broken, didn't try to fix it, just left it there. Warm." They sat in the soft hush of the back kitchen, where the scent of ginger mingled with the faint memory of rain. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was comfortable like an old blanket shared between strangers no longer strangers. What passed between them wasn't fire. It wasn't lightning. It was quieter than that. Like a mug of warm water cupped between cold hands. Unspoken. Simple enough. 2 weeks had passed since that first rain-soaked night. The city carried on, indifferent as ever. But inside the worn cafe, tucked between alleyways of Eld Hollow, something small had changed. Not loudly, not all at once, just enough to soften the edges of things. Lena and Leo had become shadows in the same rhythm, moving around each other gently, never colliding, always near. To most, Leo was just the quiet man in the back, the one who took the tables no one wanted, the one who stood in the corner, always a little out of the light. But Lena saw more. She noticed how he folded the dish towels into perfect thirds, how he always kept a half step behind when they passed in tight spaces, how a cup of mint tea, exactly how she liked it, was already waiting before each shift, without fail, without question. And Leo, he noticed the way she hummed softly while restocking sugar jars, the way her hands paused for half a second before turning on the lights in the morning, the way she never asked him to share, but left the crust off her sandwich, just in case he was hungry. On the slow days, when sunlight stretched across the floor and customers were scarce, they'd sit behind the counter, Lena sipping tea, Leo thumbing through an old paperback she'd left behind. They rarely spoke. They didn't need to. One dusky evening, rain came sudden and soft. Lena had forgotten her coat. She paused at the door, only to find it already there, folded neatly beside a man's worn shirt. She looked up. Leo was waiting by the entrance, umbrella in hand, head tilted slightly. "Let's go," he said. As if it had always been the plan. The umbrella was too small, so they stood close. Her shoulder brushed the fabric of his shirt. She could hear the rain, yes, but also his breathing, slow and steady, matching hers. For the first time, she wished the walk home would never end. Whatever existed between them had no name. No one said like, no one said need. But it lived in every quiet moment, every unspoken act of care. It flowed between them like a hidden stream under stone, invisible, but impossible to ignore. And then, on a day like any other, it began to crack. It was a Saturday. Sunlight spilled through the cafe windows, golden and careless. The place was buzzing laughter, coffee grinding, the clatter of heels across stone tiles. A group of women entered, well-dressed, sharp perfume trailing behind them like a wake. Their handbags gleamed, their smiles flickered with something too polished to be real. Lena greeted them with her usual calm. She didn't sense anything unusual. But behind the counter, Leo had gone still. He turned slightly, just enough to hide his face. One of the women, blonde with curled hair and lips painted like blood, squinted. She leaned in, whispering with a sharpness that sliced through the noise. "Oh my God! Doesn't that look like Liam Carter?" Another woman leaned closer. "No way. The one who got left at the altar? What would he be doing here?" The blonde tapped her screen. One photo, one line. Heartbroken heir turned barista, and just like that, the city devoured him again. Within minutes, the post spread like fire in dry grass. Mentions, comments, confirmations. Yes, it was him. Yes, that face, the heir to the Carter legacy, was now here, washing cups in obscurity. But Lena, still behind the counter, didn't check her phone. Not yet. The lull came mid-afternoon, quiet enough to hear the clatter of a spoon dropped too carelessly. That's when a colleague passed Lena the phone. One glance. That's all it took. Leo. The man who scrubbed floors, who brewed her ginger tea when her legs refused to stand. The man who once whispered, "I'm not as clean as I used to be." The man who walked beside her under the same tiny umbrella, where she let herself believe, if only for a moment, that someone might finally stay. She didn't say a word. Behind the counter, Leo stood motionless. Hands clenched around a dish towel, eyes fixed on the floor, as if he could will himself into the tiles. He pretended not to hear. But she knew better. And still Lena didn't confront him, didn't flinch. She turned back to her customers, gave the smile that was expected, nodded at the right times, as though her world hadn't just cracked open beneath her feet. That night, after the cafe had emptied, the lights dimmed and chairs flipped upside down, Lena stood in the back kitchen folding her apron with slow, steady hands. Leo stepped in, silent as always. "I should have told you," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to lie. I needed to disappear. And you were the one thing I didn't expect." She turned, calmly. Her eyes were no longer soft. "You said you weren't clean because of your past," she replied. "I accepted that. I understood it." Then her voice grew colder, not louder. "But when I finally let my guard down, you chose not to trust me." He stepped closer. She lifted her hand just slightly, enough to say, "Stop." "I'm not angry because you're Liam Carter," she said. "I'm sad, because the man I started to believe in never told me who he really was." Her words weren't cruel. They didn't tremble. But they landed heavy, like quiet stones dropped into still water, leaving behind ripples too wide to undo. She placed the apron on the table, gentle as breath. And then she left. The back door closed behind her. No slam, no sound. But Leo knew something far greater had just been shut. Something he might not get back. He stood alone in the dim kitchen, the dish towel still in his hands. Cold. Damp. Trembling just like the fingers that clutched it. The internet hadn't finished devouring the story of the heartbroken heir turned barista when it was already on to its next course scandal. Marcus Ellison, the man who had replaced Leo at the altar, was now headlining the collapse of an entire web of deceit. Fraud. Fake investments. Empty bank accounts hidden behind two perfect smiles. And as his name began to vanish from social circles and business boards alike, one name quietly resurfaced. Veronica Lancaster. She walked into the glass tower as if it still belonged to her. No appointment. No hesitation. Liam's office sat at the top floor, wrapped in windows that caught the last gold of the setting sun. He didn't glance up from his desk. "I don't take walk-ins," he said, eyes still on the report. "I'm not a walk-in," her voice like silk laced with memory. "I was your fiancé. Once." He set the paper down, finally looked at her. For a brief moment, something passed through his eyes. Not anger, not longing, just a kind of recognition. "Right," he said. "You were the one who left me at the altar, like it was always the plan." Veronica gave a soft laugh and sat down without waiting to be invited. Her gaze drifted around the office, the same antique clock, the same smooth black desk, everything untouched, everything unbothered by her absence. "Marcus wasn't who I thought," she said, voice carefully composed. "I was deceived. I made a mistake." She met his eyes. "The man I should have married was you." Liam didn't move, didn't blink. He just watched her and waited. There was a beat. Then the smallest curl of a smile touched Liam's lips. "Do you think I regret not holding on to you?" Veronica tilted her head, eyes unblinking. "I didn't come here to apologize." "Good," Liam replied, voice suddenly cool, cutting through the room like winter air. "Because I'm not standing at that altar anymore. Not for anyone." The words fell like glass, sharp and final, shattering the illusion of nostalgia that still tried to linger between them. Silence hovered. But Veronica didn't flinch. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and placed it on the desk. The screen lit up. An image Liam and Lena at the cafe. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at her. She was laughing at something a customer had said. And he looked like someone who had stopped running. It could have been a wedding portrait had there been rings. She really got to you, didn't she? Veronica's voice no longer pretended to be soft. Liam didn't even glance at the screen. That's not your business. You're right, she said, leaning forward, voice low but venom-laced. But the media would love it. The billionaire and the barista. I've got the photo. I've got the story. And I've got the contacts to make her famous for all the wrong reasons. Liam's hands clenched into fists. A vein in his neck pulsed, not with fear, but restraint. You always knew how to turn love into a weapon, he said, his tone like ice on stone. And you always knew how to lose the people who didn't, she snapped back. He stood, walked to the tall window behind his desk. The city below moved in quiet loops, cars, lights, lives. She's not someone you can bury in headlines, he said, voice quiet but sure. She doesn't need a camera to prove who she is. But you do, Veronica said, rising. And with a half-smile that no longer bothered to hide its sharpness, she added, Think carefully, Liam. Once I start, I don't stop. The door clicked shut behind her. This time, she didn't need to slam it. She was the slam. Liam didn't move. His reflection stared back at him from the window, upright, unmoving, a man standing in the eye of a storm. Behind him, a past built on control and appearances. Ahead, a fragile beginning he wasn't ready to lose. And somewhere in between, Lena. Not a prize, not a story. Just a woman who chose nothing and no one, except honesty. And this time, he would not let anyone take that away. 3 days passed. Liam went through them like a man underwater. He sat through board meetings, signed documents, weathered the legal fallouts from the Marcus scandal. He answered questions with precision, but his eyes always drifted to the window. And no one ever stood on the sidewalk below. Lena hadn't come back. No message, no note, just gone. Like she had only ever been a passing kindness in a storm, never meant to stay. But on a dusky afternoon, just after the rain lifted, she returned. She hadn't meant to. She only came back to collect what was hers, a notebook, an old wool coat, a book left behind in the kitchen. The cafe door opened with the soft sound of wind chimes. But it wasn't the sound that made her stop. It was the woman sitting in the back corner booth, Veronica, sharp as ever, wrapped in a beige business suit, hair pulled into a sleek bun. No red lips today. No laughter. Just those eyes, quiet daggers, sheathed in velvet. In front of her, a cold espresso. Untouched. She had been waiting, not nervously, like someone who knew exactly how the story should unfold. Lena didn't flinch, didn't smile. She walked in slowly, canvas tote still in hand. And you're right on time, Veronica said smoothly, like this was a calendar meeting. I didn't make one, Lena replied. Her voice was even, clear, but beneath it, steel. Veronica took a sip of the espresso, long gone cold. Unflinching. I knew you'd come back, she said casually. Someone like you doesn't leave things unfinished. Lena said nothing. She simply moved behind the counter, gathered the last of her things, her order notebook, the scarf she always forgot, an old paperback with pages curled at the edges, and tucked them gently into her canvas bag. Just as she was about to leave, Veronica's voice came again. Softer this time, but cold in a way that lingered under the skin. I should thank you, she said. Because of you, Liam finally remembered that ordinary things can feel. You were a reminder, a short story, Enough to bring him back to the world he belongs in. Lena froze. Her eyes landed on the espresso, its stain bleeding slowly across the rim of the porcelain, like something spilled but never wiped clean. You came here to say thank you? She asked, her voice almost inaudible. Veronica smiled. Not the kind of smile you offer, the kind you place like a trap. No, she said. I came to end it. From her bag, she withdrew a thick envelope and laid it on the table with practiced precision. A gesture of appreciation, she said. Then came a second stack papers, clipped neatly. And this is a non-disclosure agreement. You sign it, and your story with Liam disappears. No one has to know that little detour ever happened. Lena looked at the papers, then at her. Her expression didn't shift. No anger, just the quiet sadness of someone who had been here before alone. Outmatched, but not defeated. You think if I walk away, he'll come back to you? Lena asked. Veronica folded her arms, leaning back. You think someone like him would marry someone like you? She didn't sneer. She didn't need to. Her voice did the cutting. He belongs to a future built on legacy, on scale. You were never the destination, Lena. You were the recovery. The air in the cafe shifted, thickened, like every window had closed at once. Lena stepped forward, slow and calm. She picked up the envelope, held it in her hand for a moment, then placed it back down. Unopened. Untouched. From her own bag, she took out a single folded sheet of paper. The writing was handwritten, neat, though a little uneven, like someone trying to stay steady while their heart wasn't. She placed it on the table, gentle as someone placing a flower on a grave. You're right, she said. Her voice didn't tremble. I don't belong in your world, but maybe just once love isn't about where you come from. And she turned and walked out. She never looked back. Veronica didn't open the letter. She sat for a while longer, staring into her glass. Then, with practiced grace, she finished the last cold sip of espresso and left. The cafe sat silent. At the back table, two things remained: an untouched envelope of money and a letter, written by an ordinary girl who chose, in the end, to keep her pride. 3 days later, a new photo lit up social media. Veronica Lancaster, radiant in white, posed beside Marcus D. Reinhard, the same man she once left Liam for. Tech magnate, investment king, image consultant's dream. They stood like nothing had ever been broken, like the cracks had always been part of the design. The power couple returns, one headline read, and Veronica, poised before the cameras, didn't hesitate. We never broke up, she said, voice confident. It was just a pause to understand what we needed. No one mentioned Liam. No one mentioned the girl with the ginger tea and the old notebook. But in the quiet corners of financial circles, everyone knew this was Veronica's next move. And Marcus was the last name she could still cling to. That afternoon, in a glass tower in the heart of the city where no one asks how you feel, only what's your margin, Veronica walked into Marcus's office. Her heels clicked like punctuation. He was already seated, wrapped in navy and silence, his face unreadable. The room smelled like polished wood and power, and Veronica smiled like she belonged in both. Marcus sat behind his glass desk, calm, unreadable, behind his thin-rimmed glasses. But Veronica wasn't here for his gaze. She was here for his signature. I've finalized the PR team, she said, placing a sleek folder in front of him. This outlines the proposed partnership Lancaster Holdings and the Reinhard ecosystem. I'll be contributing? Marcus raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. I know, he said. No need to recite the pitch. She paused for just a moment, then smiled as if nothing had shifted. Then let's sign. He flipped through the folder, skimming pages with silent precision. Then he gave a small nod. Fine. But first, I need your signature here. He slid another document across the table, a transfer of ownership agreement. 30% of the joint venture. Veronica didn't flinch. She was back in her element, the world of signatures and sealed deals, where confidence was currency and secrets were leverage. She believed she still had the upper hand. She always did. Once the paperwork was signed, she lifted her glass of wine from a polished tray. To us, she said, voice smooth. The ones the media never dares to doubt. Marcus raised his glass, too, but didn't clink, just took a quiet sip. Veronica narrowed her eyes. Not happy I came back? Marcus set his glass down, the base whispering against the wood. I've never been the waiting type, he said. Then he pressed a button on a small remote. Behind him, a screen lit up. A video played grainy, black and white. It was Veronica. Her voice, sharp and unmistakable, echoing through the room. If you don't come back to me, she'll be destroyed in the media. The recording stopped. Silence followed, colder than any room could hold. Marcus folded his arms, no trace of warmth on his face. I'm not surprised you came back, he said. Just surprised you still think control is something you own. Veronica's fingers tightened around the wine glass. Before she could speak, he dropped another folder onto the table. A legal document, a court order. Effective immediately, Lancaster Holdings accounts are frozen. Suspicion of money laundering. And you just signed over your last leverage. Her voice broke into the silence like glass shattering. What the hell are you doing? Marcus leaned back, expression still unreadable but colder now, sharper. You thought I was the one being bought, he said. But no, I'm the seller. And greed, you paid far too much for it. The words landed with a weight she hadn't prepared for. Veronica stepped back, breath shallow. Her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant. Investors are pulling out. Media's asking for a statement. The armor she had worn for years, the bravado that had carried her from ballroom to boardroom, cracked in a single breath. She looked at Marcus. But he was no longer the man who once loved her. Not even the man who once tried to understand her. He was now simply a mirror showing her what she had become. And in the end, no one needed to expose her. Not Liam, not Lena. She had undone herself. A month passed. The headlines faded. The noise died down. But not everything returned to how it once was. Lena had left the city. No one knew where. No one asked. Only Liam found a trace of her by accident, a receipt, from a seaside bookstore. Her name was listed on it, along with a short note scribbled into the field for delivery instructions, morning shift manager, available after 9 a.m. He didn't call, didn't write, didn't ask for permission. He simply finished what needed finishing. Liam stepped down from public appearances, sold off part of his shares, returned to the company not as a face, not as a figurehead, but as a quiet name behind the scenes. And then, on the first crisp morning of early autumn, he left. No limo, no headlines, just the open road, winding toward the coast. The kind of road where no one asks who you are. Only if you're passing through. And maybe if you stay long enough what you're looking for. And there, past the curve of a quiet bay, where salt hung in the air like memory, a small town waited, with a bookstore by the sea, in the kind of town where big stories go to sleep, where pain becomes quiet memory, and names no longer need repeating, there stood a little bookstore by the sea. Its paint had once been blue, now weathered to a whisper of color. A hand-carved wooden sign above the door read simply, "Second Chapter." That morning, the sun had just begun to break through the mist left behind by a gentle rain. The air was cool, soothing like balm against skin too long worn by the world. Inside, Lena moved through the shelves with slow reverence, wiping the covers of old books like she was dusting off forgotten memories. It was quiet, familiar, until the wind chime stirred. She looked up and froze. Liam. No suit, no watch gleaming with status, no car idling outside with tinted windows, just a man in a canvas jacket, jeans faded by time, and in his hands a bouquet of wild daisies. The cheap kind. The kind Lena once said were her favorite. "The strongest flowers I know," she had told him once, half smiling through a yawn. He didn't speak, didn't smile. He just looked at her, stripped of everything he once used to hide behind. No pride, no image. Just him. Still, she said nothing. He stepped forward and placed the bouquet on the counter. Then, from his coat pocket, he pulled out a simple paper coffee cup, the kind they used at the old cafe. He set it gently beside the flowers. "Coffee," he said, voice quiet. "The kind you like, not too strong. A little orange peel?" I remembered. Lena didn't speak, but her eyes held his, steady. Liam exhaled slowly. "That night," he said, "when I'd stopped believing anyone meant anything. You gave me a cup of coffee, no questions, no saving, just kindness. And that was enough." He paused, gaze unwavering. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here because I want to believe in love again through your eyes." No music swelled. No applause waited. Just two people standing still, surrounded by paperbacks and the scent of ginger and ink, as if no time had passed at all. As if the world hadn't tried to change them. Lena reached into a drawer behind the counter. She pulled out an old, worn notebook, its corners softened with age. Sliding it across the counter, she let her hand rest on the cover for just a second. Scrawled in handwriting faded by years, it read, "Leave your trust, reclaim what was never lost." Liam took the notebook in both hands carefully, like it might crumble. There were no more words to say. They stood there for a long moment. No smiles, no tears. Just the stillness of two people who had once been broken in different ways. Now looking at each other, like maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to be anymore. No one asked the question aloud, but it lingered between them, quiet and real. Can we begin again? Not for redemption, not for pride, just for the feeling that once felt true. And maybe sometimes a cup of coffee really is enough to start a second chapter. 1 week later, the seaside town remained peaceful. But far away, the city stirred again. Not because Liam Carter had returned to the spotlight. Not because Veronica's scandal had burned out like the last ember of a dying fire. But because of an announcement. A talk show. Special episode. When kindness finds the right heart. The guest? Liam Carter, the fallen golden boy. The groom left at the altar, the man who vanished, and was later found scrubbing dishes in a quiet cafe. The set was simple. 2 chairs, a wooden floor, a soft-lit backdrop displaying just one line. Kindness doesn't choose where it's born. Liam arrived right on time. No suit, no tie, just a pale gray shirt, worn shoes, and the quiet look of someone who had returned not from a vacation, but from being lost. The host, known for drawing tears without force, offered him a gentle smile. "Thank you for," she began. And the story, at last, was ready to be told. "And if this story found its way to you," the narrator whispered as the screen faded to dusk, "don't forget to subscribe, because we still believe kindness blooms from the quietest places." The studio lights softened. Across from the host, Liam sat without pretense. No dramatic entrance, no rehearsed charm. Just a man with something he needed to say whether she was watching or not. "We honestly didn't think you'd say yes," the host admitted. Liam nodded, his expression unreadable. He wasn't there for applause. He was there for honesty. The first question came quickly. "You were once at the center of media frenzy. Then you disappeared, and now you've returned in a way no one expected. Was hiding who you were a test?" Liam leaned forward, his gaze locked onto the camera, clear, unwavering. "No," he said slowly. "I wasn't testing anyone. I was trying to stop hiding from myself." The studio held its breath. "I didn't need someone to prove they'd love me if I were poor," he continued. "I needed to become someone who didn't measure himself by titles or bank accounts." The second question came softer, almost tentative. And the woman, the one from the cafe. Who was she in that journey? Liam smiled gently. "Not for effect, just truth. She didn't rescue me. She just set down a cup of coffee. No questions." And in that moment, I remembered, there are still people who choose kindness, not because of the name I carried, but because of the way I showed up. And then the question everyone had been holding back. "Are the two of you still together?" Liam paused. He didn't look into the lens this time. He looked through it, beyond it, toward a place only he could see. "I won't speak for the present," he said softly. "I just know that every morning I wake up a little earlier to make a cup of coffee and hope to see her smile walk through the door." The host didn't press. "Some stories don't need to be opened all the way. Some love is meant to remain. A door left just slightly ajar." The conversation drifted to safer ground: finance, timing, vanishing from the public eye. But the audience no longer leaned in for numbers. They leaned in for the pause in his voice, for the ache in his smile, for the answer he didn't give. And as the show aired live, social media ignited. Team Lena. She chose to walk away because she knew her worth. He's learning how to be worthy of it. Cynics corner Cinderella 4.0. But this time, the prince does the dishes. Yet somewhere in the middle, a quiet thread remained, a story without a fairy tale ending. Just two people. Real, honest. Enough. As the show drew to a close, the host asked one final question, barely above a whisper. "If she never comes back, what will you do?" Liam's answer came with no hesitation. He smiled, tired, steady, at peace. From beneath his chair, he pulled out a paper coffee cup. Familiar. Worn. The kind from the old cafe. "I'll still make this cup every morning," he said. "Because sometimes, belief is all you have left, even if the person never comes home." The camera began to pan out, soft, slow, fading. But just before the stage lights dimmed, it caught something. A single coffee cup, matching his left quietly on a seat near the edge of the audience. No one knew who placed it there. No one said a word. But somehow, everyone understood. Maybe it was her. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe she was still choosing to love, from just outside the frame. Because sometimes love doesn't need to walk beside you. It just needs to know someone hasn't let go of hope. Thank you for staying with this story until its final breath. And if you've ever once placed a cup of coffee in front of someone without expecting anything in return, then thank you. You're part of the reason this world still feels warm. Not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay, but some, just by passing through, leave behind something that changes you forever. If this story touched something in your heart, don't forget to share it, because somewhere, someone is still waiting for their second chapter to begin.